Hey guys, welcome back to our channel. We are Munazi, aka Timo and
Sandra.
And we welcome you back. Today's video is about living in Australia versus living in Europe.
We've been living here for around 6 months now, and we've been collecting thoughts about living here and comparing it to how it was for us to live in Europe. And if you're thinking, oh, 6 months is not enough, I used to live here, so it still counts.
Before we came here, we actually traveled in our self-converted van Parker through Europe, so we saw a lot of different countries and had the possibility to experience those countries a bit more like locals and not as tourists. So we have a pretty good picture about Europe and different countries, so we try to take this into the video and make this comparison.
Of course, this is all in our own experience, in our opinion, so it might differ from your own. But let's get right into the video. So one of the first things that we wrote down in our list is the friendliness of the Aussies. I don't know if you've ever met an Australian in your life, but if you have, you know, they're pretty nice people, really friendly. Even strangers are keen to have a chat with you. Compared to Europe, this is a really big point for us because we've traveled a lot and we've tried to start conversations with people on the road, and it is not always easy. Of course, it depends on which country you're going to, but in general, especially in the northern, maybe mid-European countries, people are really reserved. And if they don't know you, they might not want to start a 15 to 20 minute conversation with you. And we were looking after disco. If you don't know who disco is, you can check this video up here. We would get stopped in the park and we would just talk to people for, I don't know, like a full half an hour. So that's really nice. Another example that we were thinking of, when you go to the coffee shop, which is like your daily routine in here, after a couple of days, the barista would remember our names, our order, we would have a nice chat. And even if we didn't go to that place for a month, when we came back, they were like, oh, you guys, like, how's it been? How's it moving and stuff? They really make a connection with you. And to be honest, like this never happened to us. Not even in Berlin when we were going to the same place and people would see us all the time. We had this. So yeah, this is a really nice point for us and we really appreciate people being so warm and kind. Yeah, we love the Aussies.
I feel like when we talk about Europe, what always comes to mind is also those nice vegetables from Spain and Italy. So fresh produce that is natural and healthy. And we don't really have the feeling that we are missing out here. They still have very nice produce, organic stuff. It's a bit more expensive, but we really care about what we put into our body. So we like to buy organic vegetables and they're really nice here too, and we don't really miss anything. So that's something that is pretty similar in Europe compared to Australia.
The organic is more expensive, but the normal ones are actually same price or even cheaper.
Yes, they are.
I mean, we were really spoiled in Germany because there are so many organic supermarkets that you can choose from.
And it's pretty affordable.
Yeah, definitely that's a big difference in here.
Moving from Europe to Australia, we realized that a lot of Aussies really like this going out culture in Europe, or let's say maybe more the clubbing scene of Europe. They're really fascinated with it. But you can go also out here and have nice drinks, but it is much more expensive. But on the other hand, you get a full rounded experience. I feel like when you're in Europe, you can go out to a bar and just enjoy your drink, but there's not maybe exceptional service or maybe not a outstanding ambience. Not all the time. You of course also find special places in Europe, but this is something more common here, that people care a bit more about you enter a place and you are in a different world kind of thing. We don't really go out for drinks, but what we've realized is that it is very common to go to a pub or to a bar here, much more than I would say in Europe, because in Europe people oftentimes also just get alcohol and go somewhere outside in a park and drink. And I feel like this is something that doesn't happen here so much, and people rather go to places and sit down and have a drink. But the biggest difference here, apart from the fact that you have to go to a special store to get your alcohol, which actually also is the case I think in Sweden and Norway, where they don't just sell alcohol in the normal supermarket, it is also much more expensive. I mean, we said going out culture, maybe smoking is also part of it for some people, but alcohol and cigarettes are much more expensive here. You can easily spend $15 for one glass of wine, which would be probably around 10 euros or so. We're gonna put it somewhere here.
For a tiny glass of wine.
For a tiny glass of wine, yes. So that's really different in Europe.
Another big difference that we've noticed living here is that we would definitely consider getting a car, which is something that we could definitely survive without in Europe. Everything's close, the public transport is amazing, or you can even bike because, yeah, the distances are not so big. But here, it's crazy. Like, it's so spread out that we really consider getting a car, because sometimes it's like a 10-minute drive versus 60 minutes in the public transport. Also the trains and stuff, they're okay, it's not too bad. But for example, buses and things, like, you just can't relate. Like, you might say 5 minutes and you're waiting there for half an hour. So yeah, public transport is okay, but it's not great.
At least in Melbourne. We
Yeah.
don't know how it is in other parts of Australia.
Probably worse, because this is like the busiest city, so.
Could be.
Yeah, let us know if you know how the public transport is in other cities in Australia. But yes, we totally get the thing that people have cars in here. So maybe getting a car would be in the cards for us. We don't know, we definitely consider. Which I've noticed though, is that there are a lot of sharing cars apps thingies. Maybe we have to look into that.
Even more in Europe though.
Yeah, that's true.
There's so many car sharing apps in Europe, and I feel like it's a bit easier. We tried to do it here once and it was a bit of a hassle.
We gave up.
So yeah, it's a bit easier to get around in Europe. Even though we are on a different continent, Australia. Yes, it's not an island, but somehow it's an island, but actually and you just speak one language here, which is English, obviously. And in Europe, well, there are many languages, and it's not always easy to get around with English. In some countries, they don't speak very good English, or they don't speak English at all, which can make communication really difficult. And here I feel like it's really easy. You can go to the tiniest village outside and you are still able to communicate with people. It just makes things much easier if you are able to talk to everyone at all times. Because I remember when we were in the van and we traveled and we faced some problems, sometimes communication was not always easy. Luckily in Spain, we could communicate quite well with the mechanics, because somehow our van always decided to break down when we were in Spain, but that's another story. But I feel like having this privilege of just speaking the same language makes a lot of things much easier, but also culturally a bit less rich than maybe in Europe.
This one might be a bit of a cliche, but architecture is really different, especially if you come from places like Madrid or Berlin, where there's a lot of history and there's a lot of old buildings, and you look around and you have all of these amazing places that have gone through so much through history. Then you come here, and I think the oldest building is like 100 years old or something. We're gonna look it up and put it in here, but all the buildings are relatively new, and in my opinion, when we go in the main streets in here, it kind of looks like an American set for a movie, like all of these houses that look a bit like paper. So that was something that I used to miss when I lived here a few years ago, just like walking around and admiring these old buildings. I don't know, I remember when we went to Paris or like in Madrid, they're just so nice. Here it's just different, it's much newer.
Something that really drove me crazy in Germany is that people just didn't care, at least in Berlin. Sometimes there was just this human side lacking and just this ability to care about something a bit more. And this also reflects in work ethics. People in general are not willing to go an extra mile at work. And I feel like that people in Australia in general take their jobs a bit more serious, or at least are willing to go this extra mile to fulfill a task, like to really help someone. In Europe, it wouldn't be uncommon if your time is up for the day that you just stop working, doesn't matter what you're doing. But here I feel like people are willing to do a little bit more to get something done, to maybe help someone out, which is really nice.
And talking about this human side, I just remember when I was working here a few years ago, one of my colleagues was actually pretty sad because he just had been through a breakup, and you know, he was just like crying and stuff. And I remember the manager being like, you know what? You take the day off, you go home, you take care of yourself, recover, you know, these things happen and it's tough. And he was just so supportive, and this guy just went home and, you know, take the day to just feel better. And it just made me think that that would never happen, at least in Spain. It's like, if you're working, man up, dry your tears, whatever, switch it off, you're here now. And I really like that here they have that human side where they understand that we're not machines, that we're humans and we go through things. And yeah, they just, you know, they're lovely like that. So yeah, that's something I really love. After living here for a few years and not together for 6 months, something we really love about living in Australia is the quality of life. The standard of living is much higher here for several reasons. First of all, the salaries are much higher, especially compared to a lot of countries in Europe. Spain definitely. Since people are really young here, maybe like 16, they start working, they start making money, saving up. And so it's really normal to go out and spend the money. It's a culture where people love to pay for experiences and they love to go out and do things with the money because they can. I feel like when I was growing up, I could not afford to go out with the salary that I was getting. You don't really need to work so much in order to make money and do stuff. So I think that's really great here in Australia, that the quality of living, the average salary is just much higher than in most places in Europe. We both grew up in houses that our parents were actually renting. I think maybe in the time of my grandparents it was normal to buy apartments in Europe or in Spain and Germany, but the era of our parents, it was not so common anymore. So we both used to renting houses or renting apartments, and that's pretty much what everybody around us does. However, here in Australia, there's still rentals for sure, but it's actually much more normal to buy an apartment or a house. We were even looking when we arrived into renting properties and stuff, and it's actually a calculator in the real estate websites that tells you if it's cheaper for you to rent or to buy, because they obviously want you to buy the stuff and make it easier for you. I think we can't really compare how hard it is to rent here versus in Europe, because it seems like all cities are going through a crisis and it doesn't matter where you go, it is hard to find a house. So you just got to get out there. I don't think there's a big difference. Honestly, when I first moved to Berlin, I heard the worst things, and when we came here, we saw that it was also not really easy. If you haven't watched our video finding houses and hunting for apartments in Melbourne, you can go check it out. But yeah, definitely buying is a thing here, and who knows, maybe you'll see us buying a house one.
Europe is not only smaller than Australia, but it also has a higher population. And it gets worse during summer, when a lot of tourists come to see main cities, and it gets really crowded. Like, I feel like when we were traveling in the van during the summer months, we really could feel that people would go and visit places, and everything just felt very crowded. And of course, you also have tourism here in Australia, but since it's so much bigger and everything is a bit more stretched out, we have the feeling that we don't feel as suffocated of tourism as we felt in Europe.
Which is a big plus for us, because we don't like very crowded things.
That's true.
It is different in every country in Europe, but overall, job opportunities are not great. There's a lot of unemployment, and it's not so easy to find a good job, which is very different from Australia. There are so many job opportunities. I feel like almost every place that we enter is looking for people or ready to hire. And it's really great to see that there's always amazing opportunities, and you have this flexibility of trying different jobs or careers, and you can really be successful because there's so many opportunities. Also, something that is really great about Australia is that they have a really entrepreneurial spirit. I don't know if I just made up a word, but they're really into starting businesses. They love startups, they like new ideas, and even young people are ready to invest in their own businesses and ideas, which is again something that was really different in Europe. I feel like you have to be old and grey to know what you're doing before you start your business. We really love that concept of doing your own thing and pursuing your own dreams. This is really normal here, which is really inspiring for us. And in our opinion, a society is simply better when you do what you love.
In Europe, it is still very common to smoke. If you go through different cities in Europe, you will find a lot of people smoking on the street, which is pretty normal, I would say. That's really different here. Like, you barely see people smoking in public, and usually not even allowed. So that is something that is really different to Europe. And as I mentioned before, cigarettes are much more expensive here, which also might be the reason why a lot of people maybe avoid smoking. If you see someone smoking in public, it's a bit more frowned upon than maybe in Europe, where it's just so normal that people smoke. And even if I look back, a lot of my friends used to smoke, and it was pretty normal already to smoke at a young age. So that's something that I barely see here, young people, or in general people smoking on the streets.
Personally, I love the fact that it's not allowed to smoke in public, because so many times we go to a nice cafe or a nice restaurant, we sit outside to enjoy the beautiful day in the sun, and have the smoke coming right into your nose from the person next to you. And I'm like, we should both be enjoying this, and you ruin it for me. So I'm pretty happy with the fact that you can't do this here.
But what the Australians love is a smoko, like a short break, you know?
Don't get fooled. That doesn't mean they're going to smoke. They're just taking a break. In case you didn't know, Australia is pretty far away from everything. So unless they produce that thing you're looking for here, it's going to be pretty challenging to get it here. Shipping things and sending things to Australia is just a challenge. Even for us to send stuff to our families in Europe, it might take months to get there. In Europe, obviously, there's so many countries together, and it is so easy to get things from a different country, next day delivery, all of these things, everything is available. And this can be challenging for many reasons. I just remember that recently I wanted to get this pair of sneakers, and they were sold out all over the country. And so maybe the next shipment from this brand to Australia might take a few months. So there's nothing they can really do. No,
and people know, and that's why they buy quickly. If a new product drops, people are aware of it and they buy quickly. So sometimes you have to be quick to get your sneakers or whatever you're looking for.
And then sell them in the black market.
And also I remember when we came here, we had to buy new music equipment. So we went to a lot of guitar stores and I was looking for a guitar and I was talking to the guy working there and he told me, mate, this is Australia. We don't have so many of this guitar here in the country even. So I got the last one in the store, lucky enough. But this is something very different to Europe, that you can really feel that there is a limited availability to certain things. We Europeans are spoiled. We have so much different culture around us. We have so many different countries to visit. There's just so much that I feel like a lot of people maybe don't have the urge to leave Europe. And that's why it is much more common for Australians to visit Europe than the other way around. The fact that they are both Western societies, but the Australians also have Asia to close proximity. There is just something different about them, a bit more open-minded and also well-traveled, which makes them just a bit more approachable than maybe Europeans who just stay in Europe. And that's certainly not the case for all Europeans, but I feel like it is not so common to hear that people go to Australia than for Australians that almost go maybe every summer to Europe to see new things and be in Europe.
I think that you said is exactly why the Australians love going to Europe, because they can catch a train or a 2-hour flight and they're in different countries. Well, in here, if you catch a 2-hour flight, you're just in the same state. And I also feel like if the Australians go to Europe, they spend a good 1 to 2 months of holidays because, you know, you have to soak it all in and you can do so many different things. But if Europeans come here, they just have Australia. I mean, there's a lot to see, but, you know, it doesn't happen so often. And the last point, that is probably the first one that comes to mind to most people when they think of Australia, is the dangerous animals. When we were traveling with our van through Europe, almost never we really had to worry about dangerous animals. Maybe we worried about getting a little mouse in the van. But however here, if you go a bit wild, if you go a bit into the bush, this is something that you really have to think about. Everything here can kill you. A little spider, a little mosquito, and not so little things like sharks and crocodiles are pretty common. Also snakes. Many animals. So if you go for a camping trip and stuff like that, you definitely have to be wary of what's around you and be careful.
I think for us Europeans it's a really fascinating thing, because I remember we went for hikes in Europe a lot. You're just not maybe as aware of your surroundings as you are here, because even if we took a walk in the park the other day, there were warning signs for snakes, and even though it's pretty unlikely to encounter a snake here in the city, you still approach it differently. You know that behind this stone there could be something that seriously
could kill you.
could kill you, you know? So I feel like when you're walking in nature, you're just a bit more aware of what's happening around you. And I remember having a conversation with an Australian in Berlin who moved from Australia to Berlin. And I think he was from the Northern Territory or somewhere. And he said, yeah, man, I still sometimes have this thing that I walk in nature in Europe and I have this alertness of looking for snakes, because he was also really afraid of snakes. You just have this rich wildlife which is beautiful, but which can also be dangerous.
Not to mention the drop bears.
Not to mention the drop bears, yeah.
Anyway, these are some points that we wanted to share with you about living in Australia versus living in Europe. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We share a lot of things about our life here in Australia, and we would love to see you joining the Monassi family.
So we see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.